Remember when Halloween bags held popcorn balls, caramel apples, and even homemade fudge? Back then, neighbors handed out sweets wrapped in wax paper instead of factory wrappers. So why do those scratch-made Halloween treats feel like they've vanished from the porch light forever? Molasses popcorn balls. Nothing said Halloween like Mama standing at the stove, stirring molasses and sugar until it bubbled into a sticky, dark syrup. The sweet, smoky smell drifted through the house, clinging to curtains and making every kid in the neighborhood wander toward the porch. Once the syrup hit just the right stage, she poured it over a mountain of popcorn, the kernels crackling as if they were alive. Buttered hands were the only defense, and Mama worked fast, scooping up handfuls of the hot mixture and shaping it into glossy, amber-colored balls. Kids knew better than to touch them too soon. You'd burn your fingertips, but the temptation was almost unbearable. Each ball went into wax paper or a brown lunch sack, tied with a piece of string if Mama was feeling fancy. By the end of the night, the kitchen table looked like a lineup of sugary cannonballs, waiting for trick-or-treaters. They were heavy enough to weigh down a candy sack and sticky enough to glue your lips together, but no one complained. On the schoolyard the next day, popcorn balls were prime trading goods, worth 2 cookies, a comic book, or even a prized pack of baseball cards. More than just candy, they were a Southern Halloween tradition and completely unforgettable. Caramel apples on sticks. If there was ever a showstopper on Halloween night, it was a shiny caramel apple dripping with sticky sweetness. Mama didn't buy those little cellophane-wrapped kits at the grocery store. She made her own caramel the old-fashioned way, melting sugar, butter, and Caro syrup until it turned golden and thick. The whole kitchen smelled like a candy shop, and when the syrup was ready, she dunked tart orchard apples one by one, spearing them with popsicle sticks, or even twigs from the yard if she had to improvise. Some apples got rolled in crushed peanuts, others in shredded coconut, and the fancy ones might be drizzled with chocolate if Mama had a spare Hershey bar tucked away. The glossy coating cracked when you bit in, leaving caramel stuck to your cheeks and apples wobbling on their sticks. Kids would try to eat them gracefully, but before long everyone's faces were smeared with sugar and laughter. Trick-or-treat bags got heavier carrying them home, and sometimes the apples didn't even make it past the sidewalk before the first bite. Caramel apples weren't just candy. They were a sticky badge of Southern Halloween pride. Pralines. For Southern mamas, they were a part of their own childhood memories. Halloween night gave them an excuse to stir up a batch, and the whole process was half science experiment, half art. Mama would mix brown sugar, cream, and pecans in her heaviest pot, stirring with the patience of Job until the mixture bubbled into a molten swirl. You had to know just when to pull it off the heat, or you'd end up with a pan of cement instead of candy. Spoonfuls were dropped onto buttered wax paper, cooling into little discs that were soft in the center but crumbly around the edges. Every bite was a contrast, the melt of sugar giving way to the crunch of roasted pecans. Some mamas added a dash of vanilla, while others swore by a pinch of cinnamon, but every family had their secret twist. Wrapped up and handed to wide-eyed kids at the door, pralines were a luxury, something you didn't trade on the schoolyard unless you were desperate. They weren't just treats. They were proof that Southern generosity made its way into every holiday. Coconut haystacks. While other kids up north might have gotten licorice or taffy, Southern kids sometimes found coconut haystacks waiting in their treat bags. These weren't fancy confections, just shredded coconut bound together with sugar syrup or melted chocolate, dropped by the spoonful onto wax paper to set. But they looked like tiny hay piles fresh from the October fields, and that gave them their charm. Mama could whip up a whole batch in no time, stretching a bag of coconut into dozens of bite-sized sweets. The texture was half the fun, chewy, stringy, and sweet enough to stick between your teeth for hours. Sometimes she tinted them orange with food coloring or sprinkled a few with cocoa powder just to keep things interesting. They weren't flashy, but they fit the season perfectly, echoing the hayrides and harvest festivals that marked fall in the South. A bag with even one haystack tucked inside felt like a lucky find, proof that simple things could still be treasures. Homemade divinity. Nothing tested a Southern mama's patience quite like divinity, but when she pulled it off, it was a masterpiece. Halloween was the perfect excuse to make a batch, since the cooler weather gave the candy a fighting chance to set. Mama would beat egg whites until stiff, then slowly drizzle in hot sugar syrup, her arm aching from the hand mixer humming on the counter. The glossy mixture turned into airy clouds that she dropped by spoonfuls onto wax paper, each one soft, pillowy, and impossibly sweet. A pecan half pressed into the top gave it a little Southern signature, though some mamas dyed the candy orange or purple to match the holiday spirit. Divinity had a reputation for being temperamental. Make it on a humid day, and you'd have a pan of sticky soup. But when it worked, it was the prettiest treat on the table. Light as air, melt in your mouth, and so sweet it made your teeth ache. Divinity lived up to its name. Getting a piece in your Halloween bag was like finding a ghost. Rare, delicate, and gone in a blink. Taffy pulls. If Halloween fell on a cool evening, you could bet on a taffy pull happening in somebody's kitchen. Mama would boil sugar, butter, and flavoring, peppermint if she had it, or maybe a splash of vanilla, until it hit that glossy, molten stage. Then she'd pour it onto greased platters and wait just long enough so you didn't scorch your hands. That's when the fun began. Buttered fingers grabbed the hot candy and pulled it wide, folding and stretching again and again until it turned pale and glossy. Kids laughed as the sticky ropes tangled, some snapping in half and flying across the room. Strands of taffy draped over chair backs or landed on aprons. But nobody minded. It was all part of the tradition. Once cut into bite-sized pieces and wrapped in wax paper, the candy hardened into chewy nuggets that carried the flavor of the evening's fun. Taffy pulls weren't just about the sweets. They were about neighbors crowded into a kitchen, kids shrieking with sticky hands, and the memory of candy that came from your own laughter and labor. Cornflake peanut butter bars. In the South, nothing went to waste, and that included the last cup of cornflakes rattling around in the box. Mama would heat peanut butter, sugar, and Caro syrup in a saucepan until it bubbled, then pour it over crushed flakes to make a chewy, crunchy bar. They were pressed into pans, sliced into squares, and sometimes topped with a drizzle of melted chocolate if Mama felt generous. These bars held together just long enough to get sticky fingers all over your trick-or-treat bag. Kids loved the mix of salty peanut butter and sugary crunch, and mamas loved that they could make a whole pan for pennies. Wrapped in wax paper squares, they stacked neatly into paper sacks for handing out at the door. They weren't glamorous, but they were hearty little treats, born of thrift and a sweet tooth working together. On Halloween night, finding one in your bag felt like getting a homemade candy bar, with Southern practicality baked right in. Peanut or pecan brittle. No candy announced itself with more authority than brittle. You could hear it crack from across the room when Mama broke the cooled sheet into shards. She'd start by simmering sugar, corn syrup, and butter until it bubbled, then stir in a fistful of roasted peanuts, or pecans if she wanted to show off. The hot mixture was poured onto a buttered pan, spreading thin into a shiny amber sheet. Once cooled, it shattered into jagged pieces that cut the roof of your mouth if you weren't careful. Kids loved crunching it between their teeth, even though it threatened to loosen a filling. The brittle gleamed like stained glass in the porch light, and wrapped in wax paper, it became a prized Halloween treasure. Some families swore by peanut brittle, others by pecan. But either way, it was the kind of treat you savored slowly, piece by sharp, sweet piece. Pumpkin bread wrapped in foil. Every so often, a mama would go the extra mile and bake loaves of pumpkin bread, the kind heavy with cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. She'd slice thick squares, wrap them in wax paper or aluminum foil, and hand them out like little parcels of autumn. The bread was moist, spiced, and sometimes studded with raisins or walnuts, depending on what was in the pantry. Trick-or-treat bags sagged a little heavier with those slices tucked inside, and more than one kid couldn't resist unwrapping theirs on the walk home. The smell alone was enough to stop you in your tracks, warm pumpkin mingling with fall spices in a way no store-bought snack could touch. Sharing pumpkin bread felt like sharing part of the harvest, a neighborly gesture wrapped in silver and memory. Long after the candy was gone, the taste of that bread lingered as proof that Halloween was more than just sugar. It was homemade comfort passed hand to hand. Popcorn balls with candy corn inside. Popcorn balls were already a Southern classic, but some mamas like to get creative. They'd stir up the sticky syrup, pour it over popped corn, and then sneak in handfuls of candy corn before rolling the mixture into glowing orbs. The orange, yellow, and white triangles peeked through the popcorn like tiny jewels, making each ball look festive in the porch light. Kids never knew what they'd bite into first, a fluffy kernel or a chewy piece of candy corn. And that surprise was half the fun. Wrapped in wax paper, they looked like holiday ornaments, heavy in the hand and sticky on the fingers. Candy corn may divide folks today, but back then it was a cheap, cheerful way to stretch a batch of popcorn balls into something even more memorable. Finding one in your bag meant you had a mama in your neighborhood who liked to go the extra mile, turning an ordinary Halloween treat into a sugary treasure hunt. Homemade fudge squares. Fudge was the kind of candy that made kids hover around the kitchen, noses pressed against the counter, while mama stirred sugar, butter, and cocoa into a bubbling mass. She had to watch it close, waiting for that precise moment when the mixture would set just right. Not grainy, not too soft, but melt in your mouth perfect. Once poured into a buttered pan and cooled, she'd slice it into neat little squares, each one a solid block of Halloween happiness. Some mamas made peanut butter fudge, others swore by chocolate, and the bold ones added marshmallows or walnuts. Trick-or-treaters got them wrapped in wax paper twists, each piece heavy in the hand and worth its weight in sugar. Unlike store-bought candy, fudge had personality. No two batches ever turned out quite the same. It was the candy of patience and precision, the kind that separated a practiced hand from a careless one. On the playground the next day, a square of fudge was good as gold, the kind of treat you didn't just eat. You bragged about it first, then savored every bite like a secret. Cider donuts. If you were lucky enough to have a mama who fried cider donuts for Halloween, you knew what fall really tasted like. She'd stir apple cider into the dough, adding cinnamon and nutmeg until the kitchen smelled like an orchard in October. Dough was rolled, cut, and slipped into hot oil, the sizzle filling the room as golden rings bobbed to the surface. Fresh from the pan, each donut got rolled in cinnamon sugar, leaving your fingers coated in sticky crystals before you even took the first bite. They were warm, fragrant, and heavy enough to carry in paper sacks for trick-or-treating, though most kids ate theirs right on the spot. Sometimes Mama piled them into baskets on the porch, and kids passing by would grab one with wide eyes and powdered sugar smiles. The real magic was how fast they disappeared. By the time the last trick-or-treater left, only the smell of apples and frying oil lingered in the air. More than candy, they were a fleeting moment of fall you wished would last just a little longer. Cinnamon candy apples. While caramel apples were sweet and buttery, cinnamon candy apples were their fiery cousins, glossy, crimson, and sharp enough to make your eyes water. Mama would boil sugar, corn syrup, and cinnamon flavoring until it turned into a bubbling cauldron of molten red. Apples were dipped and set aside to cool, their shiny shells hard as glass. Biting into one was an adventure. First the crunch, then the wave of cinnamon heat, followed by the crisp apple beneath. They left your lips tingling, your tongue stained red, and sometimes even chipped a tooth if you weren't careful. Wrapped in wax paper or perched on a stick, they looked like jewels in the lamplight, daring kids to take them on. Mamas didn't make them often, which made them feel rare, almost forbidden, like something out of a fairy tale. Getting one in your Halloween sack wasn't just a treat. It was proof you'd braved one of the boldest sweets on the block. Gingerbread cookies, cut into pumpkins and bats. Halloween didn't always mean orange frosting and plastic sprinkles. Sometimes it meant a tray of gingerbread cookies shaped into pumpkins, bats, and cats. Mama rolled out spiced dough on the kitchen table, flour dusting her apron as she pressed tin cutters into the sheet. The cookies baked until the whole house smelled like molasses, cinnamon, and ginger. Once cooled, they might get a simple powdered sugar glaze, or a few raisins pressed in for eyes. They weren't the frosted showpieces of modern bakeries, but they carried the flavor of fall in every bite. Trick-or-treat bags rattled with their crisp edges, and kids couldn't help sneaking one on the walk home. Some families baked them by the hundreds for church socials, packing them into tins and baskets to share. A gingerbread bat might not look like much, but in the South, it was the taste of October wrapped in sugar and spice, the kind of cookie that felt like home no matter where you ate it. Caramel corn in paper cones. Every now and then, a mama would skip the popcorn balls and go straight for caramel corn, baking big pans of it until it turned golden and crunchy. She'd pour the sticky mixture into paper cones made from cut-up grocery sacks, folding the ends so it wouldn't spill on the walk home. Each bite was sweet, buttery, and just a little salty, with clusters that stuck in your teeth no matter how careful you were. Caramel corn made the rounds at Halloween parties, church socials, and neighborhood porches, piling high in bowls that emptied faster than Mama could refill them. It was simple to make in big batches, which meant no kid left empty-handed. The cones themselves became part of the fun, crinkled brown paper dusted with sugar and grease, carried like a prize. Long after the candy was gone, you remembered the way your fingers smelled like buttered sugar, and how the night always felt warmer with a cone of caramel corn in hand. Prune or date pinwheels. Pinwheel cookies didn't scream Halloween the way popcorn balls did, but they had a quiet magic all their own. Mama rolled out a sheet of spiced dough, spread it with a thick layer of prune or date filling cooked down with sugar and cinnamon, then rolled the whole thing into a log. Once sliced and baked, each cookie came out a perfect little spiral, half dough, half fruit, all sweet nostalgia. They weren't flashy, but the chewy filling tasted like autumn in the South, when dried fruits made their way back into kitchens just as the weather cooled. Pinwheels were the kind of treat you didn't gobble. You nibbled, letting the spiced fruit stick to your teeth while the dough crumbled in your hand. Some kids grumbled about the old lady fruit, but the grown-ups always made sure a few disappeared before the bags left the porch. They were a reminder that Halloween wasn't just about sugar highs, it was about tradition, thrift, and the little ways mamas tried making special memories. Rock candy crystals. Long before fancy candy shops sold rainbow sticks, rock candy was a simple science experiment turned Halloween treat. Mama would boil sugar water until it was thick as syrup, then suspend strings or sticks in jars, leaving them on the counter for crystals to form. Days later, jagged shards of candy clung to the strings like diamonds, sparkling under the kitchen light. Sometimes she tinted the syrup with food coloring, orange for pumpkins, purple for witches, though most batches stayed clear, like icicles you could eat. Getting a stick of rock candy in your Halloween sack felt like treasure, something too pretty to eat right away. Kids would lick them slowly, watching the crystals dissolve one shard at a time, turning their tongues raw with sugar. It wasn't a treat you could find in stores. It was born from patience, curiosity, and a mama who believed candy could be both sweet and a little bit magical. Buttered popcorn in brown bags. Not every Southern Halloween was built on sugar. Sometimes, mamas handed out plain old buttered popcorn, poured hot from the skillet into little brown paper bags. The butter soaked through before you even made it home, leaving greasy fingerprints on your costume and a smell that followed you down the street. It was simple, salty, and cheap, but kids didn't complain. After a night of sweets, something warm and savory hit the spot. At school the next day, kids would compare bags, some with just a sprinkle of salt, others with so much butter you could see it pooling in the bottom. Mamas liked it because it filled bellies without emptying the sugar jar, and it kept hungry trick-or-treaters satisfied until supper. It wasn't glamorous, but the crinkle of a butter-stained paper sack became one of those small Southern sounds that told you Halloween had truly arrived. Spiced applesauce cake squares. If you grew up in the South, there was always one neighbor who baked for every holiday. And at Halloween, it was often applesauce cake. Mama would stir applesauce into a spiced batter, heavy with cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove, then pour it into a big pan to bake. Once cooled, she cut it into neat squares, dusted each piece with powdered sugar, and wrapped them tight in wax paper. The cake was moist and fragrant, with a warmth that candy just couldn't touch. Sometimes raisins or nuts made their way in, giving each square a little chew or crunch. Trick-or-treat bags sagged under the weight of them, but kids rarely minded. Those squares were rich enough to count as dessert and supper all in one. They weren't flashy, but they stuck with you. A quiet reminder that not every Halloween treat had to sparkle to feel like gold. Toasted pumpkin seeds. While jack-o'-lanterns were being carved, another Southern Halloween tradition took shape on the stove: toasted pumpkin seeds. Mama would scoop them straight from the pumpkin guts, rinse off the stringy pulp, and spread them on a pan with salt and a drizzle of oil. The oven turned them golden and crunchy, filling the kitchen with a nutty, earthy smell that was as much a part of Halloween as candlelit pumpkins glowing on the porch. Kids popped them like peanuts, shells and all, until their lips burned with salt. Some mamas added garlic or paprika, but most stuck with the plain kind, served in bowls that never lasted long. They weren't candy, but they tied Halloween straight to the harvest, proof that even the scraps of a pumpkin could turn into a snack worth fighting over. In a night filled with sugar, they were the savory bite that made everything else taste even sweeter. Molasses cookies. Molasses cookies were as Southern as sweet tea, and at Halloween they showed up warm, chewy, and dusted with sugar that crackled under your teeth. Mama mixed dark molasses with spices, rolled the dough into balls, and pressed them flat before sliding them into the oven. The smell was unmistakable, deep, rich, and a little smoky, like autumn itself baking in the kitchen. These cookies weren't the flashy kind with sprinkles or frosting. They were sturdy, old-fashioned, and meant to last a few days in the cookie tin, though they rarely did. Some had crisp edges, others stayed soft in the middle, but either way, they stuck to your memory as much as your taste buds. Trick-or-treaters sometimes traded candy bars for them, proof that a homemade cookie carried more weight than anything from a wrapper. Eating one on Halloween night was like tasting a piece of Southern history. Penuche candy, brown sugar fudge. While chocolate fudge hogged the spotlight, Penuche was its humbler cousin. Made with brown sugar, butter, and milk, it set into soft, caramel-colored squares that melted almost the second they touched your tongue. Mama whipped it until her arm ached, then poured it into pans to cool, cutting the slab into little blocks that gleamed in the lamplight. The flavor was warm and buttery, closer to toffee than chocolate, and it carried a richness that felt old-fashioned even back then. Kids didn't always know what to make of it. Some thought it looked plain, but once you tried it, you were hooked. Wrapped in wax paper twists, the candy had a way of sticking to your fingers, forcing you to lick the sweetness clean. Penuche didn't shout for attention, but those who loved it never forgot it, and it became one of those treats that whispered of Southern kitchens long after the holiday passed. Cornmeal cookies, or granny cookies. Cornmeal cookies were the kind of Halloween treat you only found if you had an older mama or grandmother in the kitchen. They were simple, made with pantry staples: cornmeal, sugar, butter, and a splash of vanilla. But they baked into crisp, golden rounds with a crunch that set them apart from other cookies. Some folks called them granny cookies, because they were the kind your grandmother always seemed to have cooling on a rack when you visited. The cornmeal gave them a faint nuttiness, a texture that crumbled but never quite melted, leaving a little grit on your tongue. At Halloween, mamas stacked them in tins or wrapped them in paper, handing them out by the handful. They didn't look like much, but the flavor carried a sense of home, the kind of taste that tied generations together. Cornmeal cookies weren't showstoppers, but they had staying power. Quiet, sturdy reminders of a kitchen where nothing went to waste. Popcorn balls dyed with food coloring. Popcorn balls were already a Halloween staple, but some mamas liked to dress them up for the season. They'd stir the hot syrup as usual, but add drops of food coloring, orange for pumpkins, green for goblins, sometimes even purple for witches. The result was a basket of glowing, jewel-toned spheres that looked more like decorations than something you could eat. Wrapped in wax paper, they peeked out of brown bags like little lanterns, each one heavy in the hand and sticky to the touch. Kids loved guessing what color they'd get before biting in, though the taste was always the same mix of sweet syrup and crunchy corn. It was a thrifty way to make the holiday feel a little more magical, turning an ordinary treat into something bright and unforgettable. In the glow of porch lights, those neon popcorn balls looked almost otherworldly, proof that even simple candy could carry a little Halloween mischief. Old-time pull candy, ribbon candy, or vinegar taffy. Every Southern Halloween had at least one neighbor who swore by old-time pull candy, the glossy, brittle sweets that snapped into shiny ribbons. Some made vinegar taffy, cooked until it reached a pale amber color, then pulled and twisted into ropes until it cooled hard as glass. Others turned out striped ribbon candy, each piece curled into shimmering waves that caught the light like stained glass. Making it was no easy job. Hot sugar scorched if you touched it too soon, and pulling it into shape took strength and speed. But when it worked, the candy looked like something from a shop window. Too pretty to eat, but too tempting to resist. Kids cracked the pieces with their teeth, letting the shards dissolve slowly until only a trace of sweetness lingered. Pull candy wasn't an everyday treat. It was a labor of love, the kind of candy that reminded everyone Halloween was as much about tradition as it was about sugar. Sorghum taffy. In parts of the South where sorghum syrup was plentiful, Halloween meant sorghum taffy pulls. Mama would cook the syrup down with sugar until it was bubbling thick, then pour it out to cool just enough for pulling. Buttered hands grabbed the sticky ropes, stretching and folding them until the candy turned lighter and glossy. The taste was strong, earthy, and a little smoky, nothing like today's store-bought sweets. Kids either loved it or wrinkled their noses, but no one forgot it. The taffy stuck to teeth and pulled loose fillings, but it carried the flavor of the land itself, a candy born of cane fields and hard work. Peanut butter kisses, homemade taffy candies. Before the wax-wrapped Mary Janes showed up in grocery bags, mamas made their own peanut butter kisses. Sugar syrup was boiled until hot enough to pull, then stretched around spoonfuls of creamy peanut butter, forming chewy little nuggets. Wrapped in wax paper twists, they stuck together in the candy bowl and glued your jaws shut if you weren't careful. Kids complained even as they reached for seconds, because the salty sweet flavor was irresistible once you started chewing. They were humble candies, born from thrift, but on Halloween night they felt like a prize, messy, sticky, and entirely unforgettable. Apple cider hard candy drops. Some mamas boiled apple cider with sugar until it reduced into a deep amber syrup, then poured it into little molds or dropped it by spoonfuls onto buttered pans. Once cooled, the candies hardened into sharp, glassy drops with a tangy apple bite. They clinked against each other in jars and rattled in paper bags like treasure. Each one carried the flavor of orchards and crisp October air, condensed into a single shard. They weren't common since they took time and patience, but if you found one in your Halloween sack, you knew somebody's mama had gone the extra mile. Sweet potato pie squares. Sometimes, instead of candy, neighbors baked trays of sweet potato pie, slicing them into tidy squares for trick-or-treaters. The filling was smooth and spiced, baked on a flaky crust that crumbled in your fingers. Each piece got wrapped in wax paper or foil, a portable version of the pie that showed up on nearly every Southern holiday table. Sweet potato pie wasn't flashy, but it was the flavor of home, warm, earthy, and comforting. Kids devoured them quickly, barely noticing the chill in the air as they walked from house to house. Getting pie on Halloween was a reminder that homemade generosity always outshone anything in a wrapper. Maple sugar candy. Though maple syrup wasn't as common in the Deep South, plenty of mamas with a jug tucked away in the pantry turned it into maple sugar candy. Syrup was boiled down and poured into little molds, often leaves, acorns, or pumpkins, where it hardened into creamy, melt-in-your-mouth shapes. The candies carried a flavor both sweet and woodsy, unlike anything you could buy in a store. They were fragile, dissolving the second they hit your tongue, but their memory lasted long after Halloween night. Maple sugar candy was a rare treat, but it tied the harvest season to the holiday in a way nothing else quite could. Halloween today might sparkle with neon wrappers and plastic pumpkins, but back then, it was stitched together with wax paper, brown bags, and a whole lot of mama's love. Every popcorn ball, praline, or spiced cake square carried the taste of southern kitchens that worked with what they had and somehow made magic out of it. These weren't just treats, they were traditions, passed from porch to porch, from sticky fingers to smiling faces. So maybe the caramel stuck in your teeth, or the taffy glued your jaw shut, but the memory sweetened over the years. And that's why these old-fashioned Halloween treats linger in our minds long after the candy's gone. Which of these did you grow up with? And which one do you wish you could taste again? Drop your memories down in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you're feeling extra nostalgic, go ahead and share this video with someone who remembers when Halloween smelled like molasses and cinnamon instead of plastic wrappers. Because in the end, the best treats weren't just eaten, they were remembered.